Good afternoon, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Have a good day, everyone, and God bless you. Alright, let's get right into the news here because there's quite to cover on this Sunday. And it looks like based representative out of Colorado Lauren Boebert is proposing something that Democrats absolutely hate, and they hate it. I absolutely love it. Because Democrats are only concerned with one thing, that of course is maintaining power and continuing to erode your rights away. And Laura Boebert is not having any of it. I'm sure this is probably rubbing the swamp the wrong way, the unit party the wrong way, to rhinos or wrong way. And that's the reason I love this idea. And I think they absolute something that I could get behind it, and many Americans would be behind it as well. I can't see how you can say no, that's a dumb idea. But I think it's an excellent idea. And I do believe Democrats are panicking about this new bill that she is proposing when we retake the House and Senate for it to take place. And for us to be able to get to the bottom of most of these bills and not have these bills passed in mill tonight, or with only 10 minutes to read it before you have to vote on it. So let's go take a look at this. Boebert's new proposal would expose what Democrats hide and build, and they hate it. It's amazing. When Democrats push hard for something, they actually smart. That's actually smart, and drop it later only for Republican to pick it up, and suddenly they hate it. Congresswoman Lauren Boebert of Colorado just put forward what shouldn't be revolutionary idea, but rather one is fairly salient and easy to grasp. Member of Congress should have time to read the bill before they pass it. Yes. Not this. We gotta pass before we know what's in it type stuff, right? Seriously. That's what she's asking for. Not repeal of National Firearms Act, not 100% bans on all abortions, not Article 5 the Convention of States. No, she's asking for Congress to take more time to read the bills. They pass many which they can be well over 1,000 pages. Naturally, the leftists are losing their mind over it in one breath and punching the Congresswoman's intelligence and capacity to do her job. But here's the kicker. That Congresswoman AOC called for the exact same thing just a few years ago. Let's jog that long-term memory, shall we? Here's the shot. It says it's time to change the way we think. They're done in the swamp. I'm proud joined fellow warriors in the House Freedom Caucus to call for common sense changes in how Congress operates. Democrats being outraged that I'm pushing to force 5-day period of legislators to actually read legislation before they pass. It tells you everything you need to know about how they think government should work. But we're tweeted after releasing a video, know what's in the bill before passing it. Pretty simple. And here's the chaser. Here's AOC. That's why Congress needs time to actually read these packets before voting on. Members of Congress have not read this bill. It's over 5,000 pages, arrived at 2 p.m. today, and we are told to expect a vote on it. And to our 2 hours. This isn't governance. It's hostage taking. And she's absolutely right in this. In her full 2020 Twitter thread, AOC wrote, "This is why Congress needs more time. The public needs to see 2 bills with enough time to contact her representative to let them know how they feel." Back in 2020, Ocasio-Cortez and Ted Cruz were actually on the same page about this one. If you don't remember that one, this was right before she claimed Cruz almost had her murdered. Okay. AOC noted that Congress has mere hours to read 5,000 page plus the COVID stimulus plan, which was a complete bundle, should have never been passed. And that's nothing radical, right? I can actually get behind AOC and Laura Boebert on the same page to demand our representatives to actually read these bills, and to give us opportunity to be able to voice opinion, support or opposition to it. And in other words, all we have are these bills that they put in the title line, that if you don't support this, you hate this, right? That's how they are. You are anti-democracy. If you challenge this beer bill, this is how it's been done for a while. So I hopefully learn Boebert will be able to help get this bill passed. Hopefully there will be some accounting taking place. Hopefully there will be an opportunity for us to be able to weigh in on it. And because that's how it should work, where our representatives actually have time to read it by now. Many of them don't really care, don't vote on anything, because they're there to get their kickbacks, and continue to enjoy the power they enjoy currently. And, well, thanks to Biden inflation, you're paying way more than you should for pretty much everything. Polls show 94% of Americans are upset or concerned about the impact of rising prices. 95% believe that soaring inflation is, quote, very or somewhat serious. Well, the new GDP statistics are in, and they show that we are indeed in a recession, because again, the definition of recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Now, the reality is you don't actually need the stats to tell you that, because realistically speaking, most Americans already think that we are in a period of economic stagnation. Whether you call it a recession, whether you don't call it a recession, most Americans are not optimistic about the state of the economy. Most Americans think the economy is going the wrong way. Most Americans have had their wage increases eaten up by inflation. Many Americans are concerned that the economy is now going to slow. The truth is, it wouldn't really have mattered for the Biden administration whether the stats came out negative or they came out positive, because the reality is, no matter what they say, Americans don't feel good about the economy. Joe Biden continues to try to happy talk his way through this one. What we're really looking at is stagflation. Whether you call it a recession, or whether it's not a recession, that doesn't matter. What matters is that most people feel economic stagnation setting in and inflation continues to be at extraordinary highs. The Federal Reserve has now increased the Fed funds rate 2.75, put another 0.75 percentage points, 75 basis points. This is another major increase by the Federal Reserve. This has sort of calmed the markets at least a little bit. Because, again, Jerome Powell has suggested that he is on the pathway to a soft landing for the economy. I think a lot of people have doubts about that. Okay, that has nothing to do with. I will never get over the fact that for this administration, the idea is that magically when the prices go up, that's not Joe Biden's fault. But when the prices come down, that is Biden's credit as an amazing statement. Meanwhile, the media are doing their best to spin on behalf of the administration. Politico's Ben White questioned whether a bad quarterly GDP number on Thursday would even mean that the US is heading for a recession. So again, falsifiability is the rule in the media, no matter what. Everything was going to be okay because, of course, Biden is president. So Politico Twitter account actually tweeted out, quote, "Set your alarms tomorrow. We get the first possibly inaccurate and certainly be revised reading of the US economic performance in the second quarter of this deeply weird economic year. One metric to measure if we're in a recession." But it's certainly a way to sort of rush right past the fact that the vast majority of Americans are feeling pretty insecure about the state of the economy. According to the New York Times, after more than a year of attempting to soothe consumer anxieties of restoring inflation, Biden administration officials have segued into a sustained public campaign to extinguish fears that the nation's economy has dipped back into recession. Officials keep leaning heavily on the strength of the job market, and referred frequently to the criteria used by the Economic Research Committee. That formula declares when recessions start and end. The campaign has been complicated by the Federal Reserve, which is trying to slow the economy in order to wrestle inflation under control. On Wednesday, the Fed made another supersized interest rate increase, lifting rates by 0.75 of a percentage point, raising the odds of a policy-induced downturn later this year, and they're gonna have to raise the interest rates a lot more than that, because, again, the baseline interest rates in the country. So 2.25%. 2.5%, those are not nearly the interest rates that are going to be necessary in order to drive down inflation below 7 or 8%. As Larry Summers, former Clinton Treasury Secretary, has suggested, that number is going to have to be more like 5 or 6% nationally before you start seeing a real decrease in the rate of inflation in the country right now. The fact that Biden and his aides have spent so much time fending off talk of recession shows just how glum Americans have grown about the economy, according to the New York Times, and why it's been so hard for the administration to change their minds. To paraphrase an old political adage, if you're explaining how recession calls are made, you're losing. This is correct. Mr. Biden has tried for more than a year to persuade Americans the economy is strong, and then inflation will fade. He has emphasized rapid job creation and a falling unemployment rate, noting on Monday, it was down to 3.6%. But Americans are not buying it. Consumer confidence has slumped as food, gas, and other prices soared. Voter dissatisfaction with Biden's economic stewardship has grown as I'm attacked by Republicans who have blamed the president's policies for fueling inflation and eroding Americans' purchasing power. And of course, they should blame him for that, because that is precisely what he has been doing. And in fact, it now turns out the Democrats are going to try to ram through another massive spending bill. They couldn't just agree on the spending that's actually necessary. Like, for example, there's a bill that is now being passed that's designed to prop up America's semiconductor industry as a matter of national security. I'm not against that bill. I think that the idea that we ought to subsidize the domestic manufacturer of microchips, that is a national security issue, considering what China is doing on microchips, as we'll talk about in a little while. But the Democrats in Congress decided to subsume that into a $280 billion bill, rather than actual direct subsidy. And like 30, 40, 50 billion us a lot of money for the microchip industry. Instead, they've decided to subsume that in a far wider bill. It's the same thing they did with so-called infrastructure bill as something like $1.2 trillion. And the vast minority of that money went to actual infrastructure, the vast majority of Atlanta boondoggle nonsense for Democratic allies. Now Senator Joe Manchin, in a bizarre reversal, announced that he had agreed to include hundreds of billions of dollars for climate and energy programs and tax increases in a package to subsidize healthcare and lower the cost of prescription drugs less than 2 weeks after abruptly upending hopes for such an agreement this summer. According to the New York Times, the package would set aside $369 billion for climate and energy proposals, the most ambitious climate action ever taken by Congress. So we're gonna blow more money, more subsidies into the economy, makes perfect sense. Also, they're going to raise taxes, like an estimated $451 billion in new tax revenue over the course of the decade, while cutting federal spending on prescription drugs by $288 billion, supposedly. But has the federal government ever really brought down the spending on this sort of stuff? Not really. The idea is they're gonna use their bargaining power through Medicare and Medicaid in order to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. The problem is that those prescription drug companies, they're gonna have to make their money somewhere. So where are they gonna make money? And the answer is, they're gonna stop R&D. They're just gonna keep selling the current drugs they have. Well, the R&D in the pharmaceutical industry is basically the redeeming feature of the American pharmaceutical industry. You get rid of the R&D, and they're just pumping out whatever they have available. That's just more Tylenol. Okay, Tylenol might be slightly cheaper than it was before. But it's not going to lead to the sorts of medical breakthroughs that you need in order to fight disease. The product of a deal announced by Manchin and Chuck Schumer, and it would reduce the federal deficit by about $300 billion, supposedly, by raising taxes. Now, raising taxes in the middle of a stagnating economy is one of the dumbest things you can do, and pulling a bunch of money into that economy in the middle of an inflationary cycle is also one of the dumbest things you can do. No one understands why Manchin is doing this. Even the New York Times seems puzzled. Quote, "It was not clear what had changed Mr. Manchin's mind, since he said not even 2 weeks ago he could not support such a package until he saw the inflation numbers for July, which are not scheduled to be issued for 2 more weeks." But quiet negotiations had resumed between Manchin, Schumer, and their staffs in recent days, according to a person familiar with the talks. The abrupt announcement came only hours after passing a huge industrial policy built into bolstering American competitiveness with China that Senator Mitch McConnell had said he would never support as long as Democrats continued their efforts to push through their marquee domestic policy bill over GOP opposition. That legislation still needs to clear the House Republican leaders in that chamber, so they would instruct their ranks to oppose it after news of the deal. So the idea that from McConnell was we'll sign off on the semiconductor bill with all the poor, as long. And Democrats are like, well, we're going to run through a second bill anyway. So now presumably, McConnell is going to fight back against that. The problem for McConnell, of course, is that he doesn't actually control a majority of the Senate. Democrats presumably will have to use one of their bullets in the reconciliation chamber in order to ram through this giant climate change boondoggle bill. But the Senate divided 50-50 and Republicans uniformly opposed Democrats need unanimous support within their party and the tie-breaking vote of Kamala Harris to pass the plan under reconciliation. Manchin was supposed to be the chief obstacle. One sort of ironic wrinkle here is that it's not clear whether Kyrsten Sinema is gonna vote for it. According to the New York Times, Manchin's embrace the plan did not guarantee would move forward. Several senators declined to comment on the deal upon hearing of it on Wednesday evening until they learn more about it. That included Senator Kyrsten Sinema, an Arizona Democrat who has been another holdout on her party's domestic policy measure. A lot of the key liberal Democrats were rallying behind the plan. The tax increases would fall largely on corporations and private equity firms, that'd be accompanied by a crackdown on high-earning individuals and businesses that seek to avoid paying the taxes they owe. Well, what would it mean, seek to avoid paying the taxes they owe? The taxes they have to pay. The taxes in this notion that they're violating the laws, you have to pass a bill to cajole the money out of them. If they're violating the law, the IRS would already be on their butts. One possible clue to Manchin's change of heart came in a line of his joint announcement with Schumer that they'd secured a commitment from Biden and Pelosi that would approve a separate measure to address the permitting of energy infrastructure, potentially including natural gas pipelines. So basically, in order to get some natural gas pipelines built in his home state of West Virginia, Manchin is now going to sign off on a $400 billion spending plan. Democrats said the Senate could take up the legislation by next week. It must adhere to strict budgetary rules because Democrats are going to do this under reconciliation. McConnell said on Twitter Democrats have already crushed American families with historic inflation. Now they want to pile on giant tax hikes that will hammer workers and kill many 1,000s of American jobs. First, they killed your family's budget. Now they want to kill your job as well. Senator Lindsey Graham couldn't believe Manchin's doing it. He said he couldn't believe that Manchin is, quote, agreeing to a massive tax increase in the name of climate change when our economy is in recession, as what I'm hearing about the terms of this latest reconciliation, you'll make no sense. Meanwhile, Manchin's had rather than risking more inflation with trillions in new spending, this bill will cut the inflation taxes Americans are paying, lower the cost of health insurance and prescription drugs, and ensure our country invest in energy security and climate change solutions. We need. The bill is called the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which is like the Democrats keep doing this. They keep passing bills that are precisely the opposite of what they do. This is not an Inflation Reduction Act, it contributes to inflation. When you spend more money, that contributes to inflation. There are no two ways about that. When you increase taxes, and then you also increase the spending, that increases the possibility of stagflation because taxation leads to less. It's a disincentive to invest. It leads to disinvestment in the economy. It's a very bad bill. But again, Biden is actually doing, I would say, at least the smart thing for him. He's trying to divvy up Build Back Better into a bunch of different parts and then ram it through. Manchin preemptively swatted away lingering demand from some House Democrats to lift the cap on state and local tax deduction as part of the plan. No package, adding, quote, our tax code should not favor red state or blue state elites with loopholes like SALT. The agreement is still way less than Biden originally wanted. The plan would raise most of its tax revenue, an estimated $313 billion, by imposing a minimum tax on the so-called book income of large corporations like Amazon and FedEx. They currently use tax credits and other maneuvers to reduce their tax rates below the 21% corporate income tax rate in the United States. Hopefully you folks enjoyed this chat this morning. Thank you very much.